can I acknowledge in the presence, and always dangerous in a large room with people where I haven't met everybody, but acknowledge the presence of our Oireachtas colleagues here, Deputy Chap Clear and Senator Pádraig Brady. And if there are others here, please indicate, let me know. But they're the two I've seen here from the Oireachtas. My colleagues, I'd like to welcome our international guests, Illy and Tass, and look forward to hearing their contributions in a little while. And I was going to concentrate on CAP, and I will, but Francie, thank you for your opening comments. I will take the opportunity to address just the earlier points you made. In my first 100 days in this job, and can I just say it is the honour of my life to have been made Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine, a responsibility I take very, very seriously. Having served as a TD for Kildare South for 14 years, having served as Fine Gael's Internal Committee Chair on Agriculture from 2011 to 16, Chairman of the Parliamentary Party for 4 years, and a Minister of State in the Department of Agriculture, I feel I've gained a lot of experience in the area, always with agriculture at the heart of everything I did as a public representative. And that gives me a good background and a good grounding. I know a lot of people in this room. I know the issues that matter. And Francie, you can take it as a given that we will have very close cooperation and engagement all the way along. The first thing that was put in front of me in my first few days as a minister was the risk of a fine of €100 million to our single farm payment because we were in breach of GAEC 2. I didn't sign that document that was put in front of me that I was asked to sign. The first thing I did was I called you, and I called other farmer organisations, and I asked you to come in and meet me. And I wanted to hear you. I read your proposals and your concerns. I read the history of what had happened over the last 3 years since this came in as a baseline requirement with the derogation in 23 and 24. But I wanted to hear those points from you, and I did. And I am very confident that while I understand the upset and the stress there is about anybody with peat soils and the concern that there is, and it being conflated with other issues around additionality, this is a baseline requirement. We got it significantly changed from what was very first proposed by the Commission. We have something where day-to-day activity on your farms for those farmers who are categorised now and have received a letter to say some of their land parcels are GAEC 2, you can continue to farm that land on a day-to-day basis. You can continue to plough that ground. You can continue to reseed. You can continue to maintain your existing drains. And you can even put in new drainage in line with existing legislation. There is no change to what is required of you on a day-to-day basis. And for anybody to ask questions around nature restoration, that is completely different. That's additional. What people are doing in acres in terms of with peat soils is additional. There's a baseline requirement. It has no impact on planning permission in any other way. The local authority doesn't know what's GAEC 2 and what isn't. It won't affect anybody any differently who's applying to build a house or a shed or anything like that. And I give the commitment here now, and I understand the concern there is, in a year's time, there will not be a raft of farmers who have been penalised or fall foul of this because of the work we've done. So I want to reassure people, because I know the concern there is on that, and the engagement with the IFA, with Francie and with all the team early on, expressed those concerns very clearly to me. I was hearing them as well directly, but it's always good to have that engagement. On the point of acres, it was not acceptable to me either that when I was first appointed into this role on the 23rd of January, that 14,500 farmers who had signed up for a scheme weren't paid. That was wrong. And I had to make a judgment call, how quickly can I fix that? And how can I fix that and make sure that I sort the problem for those farmers once and for all, that it's not a recurring problem? How can I make sure I don't undermine the system by doing something different that might undermine the process of delivering the balancing payments to everybody in this month? And look, I understand it's frustrating, and if you're the last farmer who hasn't been paid, or if you're a farmer like some in this room who still haven't been paid, it's the most frustrating thing in the world. But we have made significant progress. I've been to Johnstown Castle, we've made changes, we've built ourselves up into a head of steam now. We're making 2 payment runs a week, which wasn't the case back in January. We have that number significantly reduced. I stand by my commitment to have the majority of cases paid and sorted by the end of May, to have the balancing payments issued in May, which is due very soon, and to have the most difficult cases finished by the end of June. And I am keeping a daily watch on the officials, dealing with it and keeping a very close eye to try and make sure that matters. But I wasn't willing to have interventions that might undermine that balance in payments that everybody is due this month. And that's what I want to see happen. It wasn't an easy situation, but it was one I had to make a judgment call on to sort for farmers as quick as I can. And on the point of TB, the engagement continues. You know, headlines write themselves. It is a fact. I didn't say anything different to the Farming Independent today than I said on Countrywide on Saturday. Maybe print reads a little bit differently, but it is the fact that the engagement continues. I was appointed at the end of January. The first thing I requested of the TB Forum in February was for the farm organisations to make a fresh set of proposals. The TB Forum has done great work over the years, but it has got to a point where some of those issues were going around in circles, and we have seen exponential growth of the TB and the spread of TB in that time. The farm organisations made submissions, and the IFA made a very good detailed submission in that regard. My Chief Veterinary Officer then attended the meeting in March with a response to the submissions that were made from all the different farm organisations and a range of proposals. And there was significant feedback, some of it negative, some of it from the farm organisations, including IFA, that there wasn't enough around the measures around wildlife and other measures. I took that on board, I made changes, I reflected on the points that were made and on the science that is before us in terms of the exponential spread of TB, and we all know the historic nature of this terrible disease and the impact that it has on our farms and our farmers. And that working out of that proposals came to calling a summit where I brought all the farm organisations together in a full summit last Thursday, a meeting that went on for 11 hours. We had a full plenary at the start. We broke out into bilateral meetings. My bilateral meetings with IFA representatives went on for over 2 hours alone, and the other farm organisations, each one I went through. And I was listening. I was listening, and I learned something from each and every one of those bilaterals. The people in the IFA who've worked on TV for years know this really, really well. So do the other farm organisations. And depending on where you're from in the country or what enterprise you're backing, you have a particular view of its impact. But everybody had a story to tell. And I am reflecting on that. And I will make changes to the proposals. And I said very clearly, those 30 proposals that were on the table last week, not every single one of them has to be implemented, but we do need a critical mass of them layered over each other in a jigsaw effect to give us the best chance of halting the rise in this disease and driving it down. And we can't leave gaps in that approach. I've made significant changes to the proposal around wildlife. I'm proposing very significant investment, an increase of 30% of wildlife operatives, very significant increased investment in the GIF gamma interferon testing, which is the blood testing to complement the skin test, making up for the fact that the skin test is only 80% efficacy. We don't have one single test that can do this. There isn't one single intervention that's going to change the dial, but I know farmers have lost hope completely. And at the foremost of my mind in everything I'm looking to do on TV is the farmers who have reactors now, who have been through that scourge and the devastation of it. And a lot of those farmers don't see a pathway out of this. Because when we had a reactor at home down the road here back in the mid-1990s, I remember the devastation. It was way beyond the economic. That cow going up in the trailer, but it was one cow on her own. And I don't remember neighbours ever having 40 and 50 reactors in one go. That is the level of spread we have now at this stage. That's the level of the extent of the challenge we face and that we have to deal with. And I'm up for working with the organisations, and I'd really like consensus, that we can work through those issues and agree to get a consensus, not because I'm afraid of disagreement or people having a different view to me, but I know the stress there is with farmers on this. And I know that 6% of the farmers that are affected are in dire straits, but I also know that 94% of farmers that don't have this are petrified of it, and it's our job to make sure they don't get it too. So the reason I want consensus is I don't want mixed messages going to those farmers. I don't want people spinning the science and saying it's different. I'm not saying anybody's doing that, but I'm saying we're still in negotiations, and I am very clear there are 3 key causes of TB. One is wildlife, one is cattle-to-cattle transmission, and one is residual in the herd after a test positive. If we don't address all 3 issues, we will leave a gap in the fence and we will let this disease continue to come in. So I continue to engage. My only point that I will make is that engagement can't go on forever. In 2020, my department spent €20 million compensating farmers who had suffered the devastation of having reactors and having locked up herds. In the first 4 months of this year, we spent €20 million again. Such is the level of the increase in the 5 years. And I don't say that in relation to the money. I say it in relation to the dire straits we're in. This needs serious action, and it can't be business as usual. Anyway, back to the point in hand. And thanks, Francie, for raising those points, and I can continue to engage. You have my best of good faith on that. But today's event, CAP 2030 and beyond, is really timely opportunity to discuss the future of CAP. And I would like to thank Francie for the invitation to speak with you all here this evening. Since the proposals for the current CAP were first published in 2018, the European Union and indeed the world have changed in ways that would have been unthinkable at the time. Brexit, COVID, the invasion of Ukraine, the more recent disruption of the rules-based world trading order, I believe led to the reflection on some of the things we have tended to take for granted up until now. For example, many member states in the European Union are thinking about defence and security in a way that they haven't for many years. Certainties in that space don't seem quite as certain anymore. The rules that govern our trade with third countries don't seem quite as clear anymore, and so the critical importance of the EU single market to the EU prosperity and stability is clearer than ever before. Equally, while food supply chains have proven resilient throughout the instability of the past few years, it is clear that we should not take our food or the people who produce it for granted. Ensuring the availability and accessibility of food has been a bedrock of the European Union's stability. That is why CAP is enshrined in the EU treaties as one of the original common policies of the EU. It is within this context that the next common agricultural policy in the European Union's multi-annual financial framework after 2027 will be shaped. Ensuring that the CAP remains a key priority in the next EU budget or multi-annual financial framework, or the MFF as we call it, is essential. While the EU faces rising demands in areas such as defence, research and digitisation, we must ensure that the social cohesion and stability of our rural communities is maintained. The new Commission has also been setting a direction on the future shape of the Common Agricultural Policy. Last year, President von der Leyen herself led a strategic dialogue on the future of agriculture. This involved broad consultation, including with farm leaders. And many of you will know that Commissioner Hansen, who visited Ireland very early on in his tenure, published a vision for agriculture and food last February. Agriculture really matters at the EU level, and it's all of our jobs to continue articulating its importance. The Commissioner's vision acknowledges the need for greater coherence between CAP and other EU policies. It proposes more streamlined implementation of CAP to reduce the administrative burden both on farmers and on Member States. It suggests that the future CAP should support farmers who actively contribute to food security, economic viability and environmental protection, and that income supports should be directed towards those farmers who need it most. We will need to understand what all of that means in much more detail. However, I think that it is significant that food security is back in the lexicon at an EU level. This doesn't mean that the environment is off the agenda. A focus on the environment was a critical factor in supporting the budget the last time around, and this time will be no different. But I think when it comes to making the very best case of securing an adequate budget for the next CAP, the Commissioner recognises the need to position food security as a necessary element of European security and the European strategic autonomy that President von der Leyen has spoken about. And of course, the current disruption to the global economy has led to an increased emphasis on competitiveness within the European Union, reflected in the report by Commissioner Draghi and in a reflection on the importance of the single market in a report by Commissioner Letta. So agriculture and food cannot be regarded as something separate from the strategic issues dominating EU policy development at present. We must persuade Member States and the European institutions that a strong and effective common agricultural policy can contribute to all of these objectives. A stronger CAP can deliver competitiveness and economic prosperity and be a driver of research and innovation. And a separate CAP fund, the kind envisaged in the treaties, is essential if we are to preserve the fabric of the single market. I think the Commissioner agrees with all of that, and I am working with him and fellow Member States to provide a clear pathway to ensuring a vibrant, resilient and sustainable sector. It now appears that legislative proposals for reform of the 3 EU regulations governing CAP will be published shortly after the Commission launches its proposals for the EU multi-annual financial framework this summer. And there's been some speculation on what the financial framework might look like. Let me be clear. I favour the retention of the current CAP structure, a separate fund with 2 pillars. And the Commissioner has indicated that that's his position too. But ultimately, the funding available for the budget and its structure will depend on the contributions that Member States are prepared to make, and that is not an easy discussion. And of course, there will be some of the newer Member States who feel they're not getting a fair share of the CAP budget. And this has been a consistent theme at Agricultural Council since my appointment as Minister and those EU Agricultural Ministers' meetings that I attend every month. Reflecting on what a future CAP might look like, we need to consider whether it's revolution or evolution that's required. One of the things that frustrates farmers is the constantly changing policy landscape. I believe the sector would benefit from a period of stability and consistency. But we also have to learn from the mistakes of the current CAP and make things better. And we need to make sure the transition between one CAP and another is much easier. In any new CAP, we will want measures to support good farm incomes, competitiveness, innovation, generation renewal, and climate and environmental improvement. Last week, I set out my priorities for the next CAP with my Cabinet colleagues. In terms of broad principles, I will be making a case across 4 key areas. Number 1 is a CAP that is more straightforward for farmers, providing straightforward measures farmers can understand and implement, allowing Member States more freedom to better target measures to their own circumstances, and continuity of measures which are working well. Number 2 is a more flexible and responsive CAP, with flexibility to respond to new and emerging approaches and to explore new funding streams, which are additional and complementary to CAP. Number 3 is an appropriate balance between all elements of sustainability to deliver on economic viability, environmental ambition, and social sustainability. And number 4, obviously really importantly, is an adequate budget for an effective CAP. I want to ensure a CAP which retains the full toolbox of current measures under Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and which has a dedicated and sufficient budget, and ensure that Ireland receives its fair share of funding within the CAP budget. As CAP and MFF negotiations progress, I will continue to advocate for a simplified, well-funded and adaptable CAP framework that supports farm resilience, environmental ambition and rural development. To ensure the best possible preparation, I want to engage constructively with stakeholders from an early stage. Therefore, following publication of the CAP proposals, my department will commence a series of consultations and stakeholder engagements. These will be used to inform Ireland's approach and position during the CAP post-2027 negotiations. Over the next few months, I will work with colleagues across government and with my counterparts in other member states to underline the importance of food security to EU autonomy and security, the vital role of farming and food plays in our rural economies and communities, and the important contribution farming and food makes to EU competitiveness, innovation, and climate and biodiversity ambitions. So, you know, the points you raised earlier, Francie, are very valid, and I think in many ways we are on the same page. But there are a couple of points that, you know, it is really important, I feel very strongly, that separate environmental pillars has dangers that could undermine the CAP. We don't want any undermining of the CAP if we can help that at all. We want Commission proposals early so we can effectively engage and influence the outcome, particularly considering we're going to have the presidency in the second half of 2026, which will be a key time. And I am really conscious that now is the time for me putting those building blocks in place with the other 26 Ministers for Agriculture across Europe, who I'm getting to know every month out in Brussels at those meetings, because they have their asks for the CAP and we have ours, and they'll know mine and ours very, very early, and we'll know theirs. But we want that proposals to be worked out in conjunction with the MFF rollout. You don't want to be playing catch-up afterwards with the MFF gone way ahead, because you could be boxed in then afterwards. So I do think on the strategic side, that is something that's really, really important. And it's something I'm working through with my colleagues in government. Obviously, Minister Pascal Donoghue is the Minister of Finance and leader of the ECOFIN, is someone who has a key role to play here, and we work very closely across government with Taoiseach Taoiseach and everybody. So yet again, Francie, I'd just like to thank you for the invitation to be here. I expect discussions of these proposals to be well advanced by the time we take up the presidency of the EU Council in the second half of 2026. I can't think of a more important task than ensuring we have a well-funded, effective common agricultural policy in the period to 2030 and beyond. It's vital that farmers' voice is central to these discussions, and I look forward to working closely with the IFA in the years ahead on these talks and all other matters. Thank you very much.